The moment I saw those 3 words printed on that flimsy paper badge, my heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. Limited access. Guest. No gold trim, no ribbon, no elegant calligraphy like the other guests received. Just 3 words stamped in plain black ink on cheap cardstock handed to me by a wedding coordinator who could not meet my eyes. My father leaned close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered the words that would change everything. Just a guest badge, Lauren. That means no meal service. It was Sophia's arrangement. I stood there in the grand foyer of Cedarstone Manor, surrounded by elegantly dressed guests, receiving their gilded badges and beautifully scripted table assignments, and I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to crumble. This was my brother's wedding, my only brother, and I had just been classified as someone who did not deserve to eat at his celebration. Something shifted inside me at that moment. 28 years of swallowing my pride of accepting crumbs when others received feasts of telling myself that family meant forgiveness, no matter the cost. All of it crystallized into a single burning clarity. I walked to the gift table where my envelope sat among the others, and I picked it up. Inside was a check for $9,900 money I had saved over 6 months of overtime, late nights, and sacrificed weekends. I had planned to give it to Brandon and Sophia to help them start their business. I tucked the envelope into my purse and turned to face the room. My voice carried clearly across the polished stone foyer when I spoke. If anyone is losing money today, it is you. Brandon's face went pale. My parents shouted for me to come back, but I was already walking toward the door, my heels clicking against the floor with a rhythm that sounded like freedom. Cedarstone Manor was supposed to be the perfect venue for this perfect wedding. The historic estate sat on 12 acres of manicured gardens with century-old oak trees lining the drive and a grand ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a reflecting pool where swans glided in lazy circles. I had never been consulted about the venue selection, of course. I had learned about the wedding plans through our family group chat, always as an afterthought, always with the understanding that my opinion was neither wanted nor needed. Sophia had chosen Cedarstone Manor because it projected exactly the image she wanted to convey to the world. Wealthy, refined, exclusive. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was the secret connection I shared with this place. But that would come later. The check-in process had seemed normal enough at first. Guests approached a long table draped in white linen where wedding coordinators distributed badges and table assignments with warm smiles. I had watched an elderly aunt receive her golden badge with a ribbon attached and heard her delighted exclamation at the beautiful calligraphy spelling out her name and table number. When I reached the front of the line, the coordinator's smile faltered. She glanced down at her clipboard, then back at me, and something flickered across her face. Embarrassment, perhaps, or pity. She handed me the paper badge without meeting her eyes, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. My mother appeared at my side almost instantly, as though she had been waiting for this moment. Her face arranged itself into an expression of studied concern that I had seen 1,000 times before. "Oh, Lauren, the budget was so tight. You understand, do you not?" I did not understand. I had never understood how my family could treat me as though I were an inconvenience to be managed rather than a daughter and sister to be loved. My father joined us, his jaw set in that familiar way that meant he expected compliance. "Do not make a scene. This is Brandon's day. We can discuss this later." But there would be no later. There had already been too many layers in my life, too many moments when I had swallowed my hurt to preserve the peace, too many times when I had convinced myself that things would be different eventually. I made my way to the seating chart displayed on an ornate easel outside the ballroom. The board was decorated with fresh flowers and elegant greenery, each table marked with its assigned guests in beautiful handwriting. I searched for my name among the family tables, then among the general guests, then among the outer circles. My name was not there. A server noticed me standing frozen before the board. She approached with the careful expression of someone delivering bad news. "Limited access guests are not included in the dinner service," she said quietly. "I am sorry." I looked around the room and saw my future sister-in-law watching me from across the foyer. Sophia's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, only triumph. She had won. She had finally proven to the world that I was exactly what she had always claimed. I was nothing. The gift table drew my attention like a beacon. It overflowed with beautifully wrapped packages, thick cream envelopes, and elegant ribbon-tied boxes. The presents represented love and well wishes from friends and family who wanted to celebrate Brandon and Sophia's new life together. My envelope sat among them, plain white unsealed, holding the check that represented months of sacrifice. I had chosen a simple envelope deliberately, knowing that my family would judge anything too fancy as pretentious and anything too plain as cheap. I had thought the money would speak for itself. Now I understood that nothing I did would ever be enough. Not for them. I thought about the overtime shifts I had worked to save that money, the weekends spent at my laptop instead of with friends, the small luxuries I had denied myself because I wanted to do something meaningful for my brother. And all the while they had been planning to exclude me from their celebration. The betrayal rose up in my throat like bile. They wanted my money, but not my presence. They wanted my generosity, but not my company. They wanted everything I could give them while offering nothing in return. I picked up my envelope and tucked it into my purse. Brandon saw me from across the room. His face shifted from confusion to alarm as he realized what I was doing. He started toward me, his new bride's hand still linked with his, but I was already moving. My parents' voices rose behind me, sharp with panic. "Lauren, come back here! What do you think you were doing?" I turned at the door just long enough to deliver the words that had been building inside me for 28 years. I am not a limited access guest. I am simply limiting my kindness. Then I walked out into the sunlight, leaving behind the chaos of their shouts and the wreckage of their expectations. The gardens of Cedarstone Manor were beautiful in the late afternoon light. I walked through them slowly, following paths that felt strangely familiar. These were the same paths where my Aunt Hazel had walked with me when I was a child, pointing out the different flowers, teaching me the names of birds, telling me stories about the history of this magnificent estate. Aunt Hazel had been the only person in my family who ever made me feel truly seen. She had died 5 years ago, leaving behind a secret that would soon change everything. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel, for a long moment breathing deeply, feeling my heart rate slowly return to normal. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the manor house rising above the trees, its windows gleaming gold in the setting sun. They have no idea, I whispered to myself. They have no idea that this venue does not belong to them. I started the engine and pulled away from Cedarstone Manor, leaving behind the family that had never wanted me and driving toward a future they could not imagine. I was not just taking back the $9,900 check. I was taking back everything they had stolen from me. My dignity, my self-worth, my belief that I deserved to be loved, and soon, very soon, they would learn exactly what they had lost. The drive home from Cedarstone Manor took 45 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the aftershock of finally standing up for myself. The humiliation still burned in my chest, hot and sharp, but something else burned alongside it now. Something that felt dangerously close to power. My phone buzzed constantly from the passenger seat. I did not need to look to know who was calling. They would be in damage control mode now, crafting their narrative, deciding how to spin my departure to the wedding guests. Lauren is so sensitive. Lauren always overreacts. You know how she is. I knew exactly how I was. I was the family scapegoat, the one who absorbed everyone else's disappointments and failures, so they never had to examine their own behavior. I had been playing this role since childhood, and I had played it so well that I had almost forgotten it was not my true self. The familiar ache of decades-long favoritism settled into my bones as I drove through the evening traffic. This was not the first time my family had treated me as less than. It was simply the most public. When I was 9 years old, Brandon won a participation ribbon at a school track meet. My parents threw him a celebration dinner at his favorite restaurant, complete with balloons and a cake with his name on it. That same week, I had won first place in the state spelling bee, a competition that had required months of study and practice. My mother's response had been a tight smile and a reminder that academic achievements were just showing off. "Brandon is the real athlete in the family," she had said. "Try to be more like him." The pattern had only intensified as we grew older. When Brandon barely graduated from college with a degree in business, my parents bought him a new car. When I earned a full scholarship to graduate school and then built a successful freelance marketing career, my father told me that real jobs came with benefits and a steady paycheck. "Stop playing at being independent," he had said. "It is embarrassing." The favoritism extended to every corner of our lives. Brandon received birthday parties and Christmas bonuses and down payments on apartments. I received criticism disguised as concern and advice that always seemed designed to make me feel smaller. My mother, Marlene, had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "You look nice today, Lauren. Have you lost weight?" Or maybe it is just the black dress slimming. My father, Richard, had mastered dismissive silence, the way he would look through me as though I were not even in the room when I tried to share good news or ask for advice. And then Sophia had entered our lives, and everything had gotten infinitely worse. Sophia came from a wealthy family in Connecticut, and she had brought with her an entire arsenal of subtle cruelty that my parents found absolutely charming. Within months of dating Brandon, she had convinced my family that I was the problem. "Lauren is so negative," she would say with a sympathetic sigh. "I try to include her, but she makes everything awkward." I had never been given the chance to make anything awkward. I had been excluded from the very beginning, invited to family dinners, only to discover that plans had changed and no one had thought to tell me or left off email chains about holiday gatherings until it was too late to make arrangements. The night before the wedding, I should have known something was wrong. I had texted my mother to ask about the seating arrangements, and her response had been vague. "Do not worry about it," she had written. "Sophia has everything under control." Sophia had also sent me a message that night, one that I had dismissed as nervousness. "I think the buffet might be overwhelming for you," she had written. "You might feel more comfortable if you do not eat with everyone else. I am just looking out for you." I had told myself she was being considerate. I had made excuses for her for all of them, because making excuses was what I had been trained to do. And then I had written that check. $9,900, everything I had saved, because I had wanted to prove that I could be a good sister despite everything. I had wanted to show them that I was generous and forgiving and worthy of being loved. I arrived at my apartment building as the sun was setting, painting the Portland skyline in shades of orange and gold. My apartment was small but neat, filled with furniture I had chosen myself and art I had collected over years of careful saving. I had built this life without any help from my family, and that thought gave me strength as I climbed the stairs. Inside, I set my purse on the kitchen counter and pulled out the envelope containing my check. The paper was slightly crumpled now from being handled so much today. I smoothed it flat and looked at the numbers, thinking about all the sacrifices those digits represented. They did not want me. They never had. They only wanted what I could provide for them. I walked to my small home office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk, where a fireproof lockbox sat hidden beneath a stack of old tax documents. Inside the box was a manila folder, thick with legal papers, all of them bearing the letterhead of a prestigious Portland law firm. The inheritance from Aunt Hazel. She had been my mother's older sister, but the two women could not have been more different. While my mother collected grievances and distributed blame, Aunt Hazel had collected kindness and distributed joy. She had never married, never had children of her own, but she had poured all her maternal love into me. When she died, everyone expected her estate to be divided among the family. Instead, her attorney had contacted me in private with news that had left me speechless. I was Hazel's sole heir, and her estate was worth far more than anyone had ever imagined. The folder contained documents I had been forbidden to discuss for 5 years, part of the conditions of the inheritance. Aunt Hazel had wanted me to have time to build my own life before the family discovered what she had left me. She had known even then how they would react. I had honored her wishes, keeping the secret, even when it meant watching my family dismiss me as a failure and a disappointment. But now, looking at the documents that included the deed to Cedarstone Manor, I wondered if the time for secrets was coming to an end. My phone buzzed again, and this time I looked at the screen. The family group chat was exploding with messages, all of them various versions of the same demand. Lauren needs to apologize. Lauren embarrassed everyone. Lauren ruined the wedding. Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one expressed concern for my feelings. Not one acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, I had been wronged. I turned my phone face down on the desk and looked out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the darkness. If they could remove me from the banquet table, then they could remove me from the family. But this time, I would be the one who decided my own position. And when they finally learned the truth about who I really was and what I really owned, they would understand exactly what they had lost. The morning after the wedding, I woke to a silence that felt almost holy. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, casting patterns on the white walls, and for a long moment, I simply lay there, breathing. The events of yesterday felt like a fever dream, something that had happened to someone else entirely. Then I reached for my phone, and reality came flooding back. My inbox showed 43 new messages in the family group chat, 7 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, 1 from Brandon. The voicemails were waiting like unexploded ordnance, each one containing some variation of the same message I had heard my entire life. You are the problem. You need to apologize. You are making too much of this. I listened to my father's voicemail first. His voice carried that particular tone of wounded dignity that he deployed whenever someone dared to challenge his authority. Lauren, this has gone far enough. You embarrassed the entire family in front of everyone. I expect you to call your brother and apologize. Sophia is very upset. Sophia was upset. Of course Sophia was upset. Never mind that I had been publicly humiliated at my own brother's wedding, denied food and seating like a stray dog that had wandered in off the street. Sophia's feelings were what mattered. The next voicemail was from my mother, and her approach was different, but equally familiar. She deployed the guilt-laden concern that had been her weapon of choice since I was old enough to understand words. Lauren, honey, I know you are upset, but this is not the way to handle things. If you had just been more flexible, if you had just understood. Sophia worked so hard on this wedding, and you know how sensitive she is. I deleted both messages without saving them. The text from Brandon was brief and utterly predictable. Thought you were better than this, M. Call me when you grow up. M. The childhood nickname that he had not used in years deployed now as a manipulation tactic. Remember when we were close? Remember when you would do anything I asked? Be that person again. Submit. I was done submitting. I made myself coffee and sat at my kitchen table looking out at the city waking up below. The check for $9,900 lay on the counter where I had left it last night, a physical reminder of everything I had almost given away. 2 months before the wedding, Brandon had called me with unusual warmth in his voice. He needed money, he explained. The honeymoon deposit was due, and they were short by about $10,000. Sophia's family had already contributed so much. Their own savings were tied up in investments. Could I help? I had said yes immediately, because that was what I did. I was the sister who showed up, the daughter who sacrificed the family member who could always be counted on to fill whatever gap others had created. I had started working overtime that same week, picking up every extra project I could find, saving every spare dollar. When I told Sophia about my plans to contribute, she had responded with that particular smile that never quite reached her eyes. Oh, Lauren, you do not have to do that. I mean, unless you really want to. We would never ask. But they had asked. Brandon had asked directly, and Sophia's performative reluctance had been nothing more than theater designed to make her look gracious, while still accepting my money. My parents had been thrilled when they heard about my gift. Finally, they seemed to say, finally, Lauren is doing something useful. Finally, she is contributing to this family in a meaningful way. Not by building a successful career, not by earning a graduate degree, not by creating a life entirely on my own terms. Those achievements meant nothing. Only the money mattered, only what I could give them. I picked up the check and looked at it for a long moment. Then I walked to my office, pulled out a pair of scissors, and cut it into tiny pieces. The paper fluttered into my trash can like confetti, and I felt something loosen in my chest. That money had represented my desire to be loved, my hope that maybe this time, finally, they would see me as worthy. But I understood now that no amount of money would ever buy me a place at their table. They did not want me there. They only wanted what I could provide. I had something far more valuable than $9,900. I had the truth. My phone rang and I recognized the number as belonging to the estate attorney handling Aunt Hazel's affairs. I answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Ms. Hale," said the voice on the other end. "This is Elliot Marston. I hope I am not calling too early." "Not at all. I wanted to let you know that all the paperwork has been finalized. You are now the full and legal owner of the assets specified in your aunt's will. When would you like to come in and review the documents?" I looked at the pieces of my destroyed check scattered in the trash can, and I smiled for the first time since yesterday. "How about tomorrow morning?" The rest of the day passed in a strange calm. I went for a walk through my neighborhood, something I rarely had time for during my busy work weeks. I bought flowers at the farmer's market and arranged them in a vase on my kitchen table. I cooked myself a real dinner instead of eating cereal over the sink like I usually did when I was alone. My phone continued to buzz with messages from my family, but I did not read any of them. Whatever they had to say could wait. Whatever manipulation they were planning could unfold without my participation. That evening, I sat on my small balcony and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and rose. For the first time in years, I felt the absence of the constant anxiety that had been my companion since childhood. The need to please, to accommodate, to make myself smaller so that others could feel bigger. All of it had lifted, leaving behind something that felt almost like peace. They thought I was limited. They thought I was disposable. They thought I would crawl back to them begging for forgiveness, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they chose to throw my way. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. I looked toward the mountains in the distance where Cedarstone Manor sat on its hilltop, its windows probably dark now that the wedding was over and the guests had gone home. That beautiful estate where my family had chosen to humiliate me. If they only knew who owned 51% of that magnificent property. If they only knew that the limited access guest they had dismissed was actually the majority owner of the venue where they had celebrated their precious wedding. They would know soon enough, but not yet. Not until I was ready. For now, I would let them stew in their righteous anger. Let them convince themselves that I was the villain of this story. Let them spin their narratives and build their cases and prepare their demands. When the truth finally came out, all of their carefully constructed lies would come crashing down around them, and I would be standing in the rubble, finally free. 3 days after the wedding, my father sent what he clearly considered a summons. "Family meeting tonight at the house, 7 o'clock. Be there. Not a request, not an invitation." A command issued with all the imperial certainty of a man who had never been told no by his daughter and did not expect to start hearing it now. I arrived at exactly 7, pulling into the driveway of the house where I had grown up. The building looked smaller than I remembered, its paint fading in places, the lawn less manicured than it had once been. This had been my entire world for the first 18 years of my life, the place where I had learned all the wrong lessons about love and worth and family. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her face arranged in an expression of wounded martyrdom that I knew all too well. "Lauren, finally. Come in." The living room had been staged for confrontation. My father sat in his leather armchair, the one that had always been his throne. Brandon and Sophia occupied the love seat, their bodies pressed together in a united front. My mother gestured toward the small wooden chair that had been positioned facing all of them, clearly meant to make me feel like a defendant awaiting judgment. I sat down and said nothing. The silence stretched for an uncomfortable moment before my mother broke it. "We need to discuss what happened at the wedding." I waited. My father leaned forward. "You embarrassed this family in front of 200 guests. Whatever point you were trying to make, you made it. Now it is time to apologize and move forward." I kept my voice even. Move forward to where exactly Brandon shifted on the love seat. Sophia squeezed his hand and spoke in that honeyed tone that had always made my skin crawl. "We are all adults here. I think we can admit that things got out of hand. Emotions were running high. It was a stressful day. I turned to look at her directly. Whose emotions? Whose stress? Sophia's composure flickered for just a moment. What do you mean? I mean that someone in this room decided to change my guest status from family to limited access. Someone sent an email to the venue requesting that I be moved to a different category. Someone approved that change. I would like to know who. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. Brandon stared at the floor. Sophia was the first to recover. I do not know what you are talking about. The venue handles all those arrangements. Does it? I kept my gaze fixed on her. Because I have the emails. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I watched their faces as the implications sank in. The emails, proof, documentation of their betrayal. My mother's voice came out strangled. Where did you get it? I mean, what emails are you talking about? The ones requesting my reclassification. The ones that were sent from your email address, Mother. The ones that Brandon approved. That is not. My father started, then stopped. His face had gone from pale to crimson with suppressed rage, a dangerous sign I remembered from childhood. It is. I cut him off calmly. I have copies. I have timestamps. I have everything. Brandon finally found his voice. Look, it was not like that. Sophia was stressed about the seating chart. There was not enough room at the family tables. We thought you would understand. Understand what? That I do not deserve to eat at my own brother's wedding, that I am not family enough to sit with the rest of you. You are always so dramatic. Sophia's mask had started to slip, revealing the contempt beneath. It was one meal, one seating arrangement, and you had to turn it into some huge production. I stood up slowly, and something in my movement made all of them lean back slightly, as though they were suddenly uncertain of their ground. You did not just take away my seat. You took away my place in this family. You made a deliberate choice to humiliate me in front of everyone we know, and now you want me to apologize for reacting to that humiliation. My mother's tears had started the ones she deployed whenever she needed to redirect attention away from her own actions. Lauren, please, I never wanted to hurt you. I was just trying to keep the peace. Keep the peace with whom I asked. Sophia Brandon. Because you certainly were not keeping the peace with me. My father stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. That is enough. This ends now. You will apologize to your brother and his wife, and we will never speak of this again. I looked at him. Really looked at him, and I saw for the first time how small he actually was. Not physically small, but diminished. A man who had spent his entire life demanding respect he had never earned, wielding authority he had never deserved. No, I said simply. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. No one moved. No one spoke. I do not think any of them had ever heard me say that word to them before. I will not apologize, I continued. I did nothing wrong. You, all of you, made choices that hurt me deliberately and systematically. And instead of owning those choices, you are sitting here trying to make me feel guilty for having feelings about them. Brandon's face had gone red. You are making this into something it is not. Am I? Or am I finally seeing things clearly for the first time in my life? My mother reached for my arm. Lauren, sweetheart, you are upset. You are not thinking straight. Let us just calm down and talk about this reasonably. I stepped back out of her reach. I have been reasonable my entire life. I have been accommodating and understanding and forgiving. And what has it gotten me? A paper badge and no dinner at my brother's wedding. Sophia stood up abruptly. I am not going to sit here and be attacked. Brandon, I want to go. But I was not finished. You know what the really interesting thing is, I said, and something in my voice made them all freeze. You have no idea how important I actually am. They stared at me in confusion. You think I am a failure, the disappointment, the one who does not quite fit the image you want to project to the world, but you do not know the first thing about who I really am or what I really have. My mother's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. When you figure out how to have an honest conversation, let me know. Until then, I have nothing more to say. I left them standing in stunned silence, my father's face flushed crimson with suppressed rage, my mother's tears flowing freely now, Brandon and Sophia clutching each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. I breathed it in deeply, feeling something shift and settle inside me. For 28 years, I had been afraid of their disapproval, terrified of being cut off from the family that had never really wanted me anyway. That fear is gone now. In its place was something harder and sharper, not quite angry, not quite resolved, something more like clarity. They would learn the truth eventually. About inheritance, about the venue, about everything Aunt Hazel had left me. But they would learn it on my terms in my time. And by then, the seat they had taken from me would be the smallest thing they had lost. The law office of Elliot Marston occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Portland with views that stretched from the river to the mountains. I had been here only twice before, both times, in the immediate aftermath of Aunt Hazel's death, both times too overwhelmed with grief to fully process what was happening. Today was different. Today I walked through those doors with my head high and my purpose clear. "Good morning, Miss Hale." The receptionist greeted me with a warmth that still surprised me. "Mr. Marston is expecting you. Please go right in." I made my way down the hushed corridor to Elliot's corner office. He rose from behind his desk when I entered, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. "Your aunt was one of my favorite clients," he had told me once. "She had more wisdom in her little finger than most people accumulate in a lifetime." "Lauren." He shook my hand firmly. "I'm so glad you could come. Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." He had arranged a stack of documents on the conference table, each one marked with colorful tabs indicating where my signature would be required. But before we got to the paperwork, he slid a single sheet of paper across the table to me. "Property deed," the header read, and below that, in official legal language that still made my heart race every time I saw it, Cedarstone Manor. 51% ownership, Lauren Hale. "Your aunt acquired her stake in the manor over the course of 15 years, Elliot explained. "She was very strategic about it. She bought shares from various investors, always quietly, always through intermediaries. By the time she passed away, she owned the majority interest in one of the most valuable event properties in the Pacific Northwest." I stared at the document, remembering the wedding just days ago, the grand foyer where I had received my paper badge, the seating chart that had not included my name, the ballroom where 200 guests had celebrated my brother's marriage while I stood outside like a beggar at the gate. "The venue management is aware of your ownership," Elliot continued. "They have been waiting for you to formally assume control. Until now, the estate has been managed by a trust, but all the paperwork has been finalized for the transfer." I looked up at him. Why did she do it? Why did she buy the manor? Elliot smiled a sad smile full of memory. "She told me once that she wanted you to have a place where you belonged, a place that could never be taken away from you no matter what your family did." I felt the tears start sliding down my cheeks in silence. Aunt Hazel had known. She had seen exactly how my family treated me, and she had spent years quietly building a fortress for me, a place of power and belonging that would be mine forever. "There is more," Elliot said gently. He slid another folder across the table. "The Hazel Legacy Fund." I opened the folder and felt my breath catch in my throat. The numbers on the page seemed impossible. Total assets, $1,070,000. "Your aunt was a remarkable investor," Elliot said. "She lived simply and saved carefully, and she wanted all of it to go to you. There were conditions, of course. You could not touch the principal for 5 years. You could not tell your family until the transfer was complete. She wanted you to build your own life first to prove to yourself that you did not need their approval to succeed." "I did prove it," I whispered. "Yes," Elliot nodded. "You did. And now all of this belongs to you." I spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents, signing papers, and asking questions about the management of both the manor and the fund. Elliot walked me through everything with patience and care, treating me not as a client, but as the intelligent, capable woman that Aunt Hazel had always believed me to be. When we finished, he handed me a small envelope. "She left this for you," he said, "asked me to give it to you when the time was right." Inside the envelope was a handwritten note on Aunt Hazel's distinctive cream stationery. My dearest Lauren, it read. If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. You were never the disappointment they made you believe you were. You were the brightest light in our family, and they tried to dim you because your shine made them uncomfortable. Do not let them convince you that you are small. You are vast and valuable and worthy of every good thing. The manor is yours because you deserve a place where no one can ever make you feel unwelcome again. Use it wisely. Use it well. And remember that you are loved completely and unconditionally by at least one person in this family. Forever yours, Aunt Hazel. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my purse next to my heart. Walking out of the law office, I felt like a different person than the one who had walked in. Not different because of the money or the property, though those things certainly mattered. Different because I finally understood something that had eluded me my entire life. I had worth. Real, tangible, undeniable worth. Not because of what I could give or do for others, but simply because I existed. Aunt Hazel had seen it. She had believed in it so strongly that she had spent years building a legacy to prove it to me. My family thought they knew who I was, the disappointing daughter, the unreliable sister, the limited access guest who did not deserve a seat at their table. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. I drove to Cedarstone Manor that afternoon, my first visit as the official majority owner. Quinn, the general manager, met me at the front door with a warm handshake and genuine enthusiasm. Ms. Hale, we are so pleased to finally meet you properly. Your aunt spoke of you often. She was very proud of everything you accomplished. Please call me Lauren. Quinn gave me a tour of the property, showing me the improvements that had been made over the past few years and the plans for future development. As we walked through the gardens, where I had played as a child, I felt Aunt Hazel's presence everywhere. In the careful landscaping, in the restored historic features, in the warm and welcoming atmosphere that she had worked so hard to cultivate. There is one more thing, Quinn said as we finished our tour. She hesitated for a moment. The wedding that took place here recently, the Hale Morgan wedding, I nodded. My brother, yes. Quinn's expression shifted to something like sympathy. I have to tell you that we received some unusual requests from the family regarding the guest arrangements. We followed their instructions because they came from the people paying the bills, but several of us on staff were uncomfortable. I appreciate you telling me, I said, and I appreciate your discretion. Of course. Quinn straightened her shoulders. You should know that as of today, those people have no authority here. Any future events they wish to book will require your personal approval. The power in those words settled around me like a warm blanket. My family had no authority here. They had spent their lives telling me that I was nothing, that I contributed nothing, that I was worthy of nothing. And all that time, I had been the majority owner of the venue where they had chosen to celebrate their most important occasions. Thank you, Quinn, I said. I have a feeling we are going to work very well together. I drove home that evening with the windows down, letting the cool Portland air wash over me. The city lights sparkled in the darkness, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged here. Not as a struggling freelancer trying to prove her worth, not as the family disappointment scraping by on the margins, but as a woman of substance and power, someone who had resources and options and the ability to shape her own destiny. Tomorrow, I will begin planning. Not revenge exactly, something more like justice, more like the truth. My family thought they had put me in my place. They were about to learn that my place was far higher than they had ever imagined. The discovery came almost by accident. I was reviewing the venue's administrative records, something Quinn had suggested, as a way to familiarize myself with operations, when I stumbled across a folder labeled Wedding Special Requests. Inside were hundreds of files documenting the various demands that wedding parties had made over the years. Dietary restrictions, seating preferences, decoration requirements. Most of them were mundane, the ordinary details of planning a celebration. But one file caught my attention immediately. Hale Morgan Wedding, Guest Classification Changes. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The first document was an email chain that filled me with cold shock. From Sophia Morgan, to Cedarstone Manor Events Team, Subject Seating Adjustment Request. Please remove Lauren Hale from the family section of the seating chart. She causes tension at family events, and we want the wedding to go smoothly. The groom has approved this change. Do not inform her of the adjustment. I read the words 3 times, making sure I understood them correctly. Sophia had not just suggested my removal from the family table. She had actively requested it in writing, citing me as a source of tension that needed to be eliminated for her perfect day. The next email in the chain was even worse. From Marlene Hale. To Cedarstone Manor Events Team. Subject reseating adjustment request. Please move Lauren Hale to the limited access guest category. She does not need a meal service. Keep her away from the photography areas if possible. We want the wedding to look clean. My mother, my own mother, had written those words. She does not need a meal. Keep her away. We want the wedding to look clean. Clean, as though I were a stain to be removed, as though my presence would somehow dirty their precious celebration. At the bottom of the email chain was a single line that destroyed any remaining hope I might have had about my brother. Approved, Brandon Hale. I sat back in my chair, feeling the full weight of their betrayal settle onto my shoulders. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a seating chart error or a communication breakdown. This was a deliberate, coordinated effort to exclude me, humiliate me, and ensure that I knew exactly where I ranked in their family hierarchy, somewhere at the very bottom, somewhere below the caterers and the florists and the strangers they had never met, somewhere in the category of people who do not deserve food or photographs or dignity. Quinn knocked softly on the office door. "Is everything all right? You have been here for quite a while." I looked up at her, and something in my expression must have alarmed her because she quickly closed the door and sat down across from me. "I found the emails," I said. "The ones about the guest classification changes for my brother's wedding." Quinn's face tightened with something that looked like anger on my behalf. "I was going to tell you about those. We have been keeping records of everything in case you ever wanted to know the full story. Tell me everything." And she did. Quinn explained that the Hale family had been difficult from the first meeting about the wedding. They had demanded special treatment, complained about costs, and made numerous requests to modify standard procedures. The staff had found them rude and entitled, but they had followed instructions because that was their job. But the request to reclassify you, Quinn, said that one bothered all of us. The note about not informing you, about keeping you away from photos, about not providing you with a meal. It felt wrong. Several staff members commented on it privately. Did anyone object? The previous events coordinator raised it with your mother. She was told to mind her own business, that family matters were not the venue's concern. I thought about that coordinator, whoever she was trying to advocate for me, and being shut down by my own mother. It was such a perfect encapsulation of my entire life. Other people could see what was happening. Other people recognized the injustice. But my family had so much power over the narrative that no one felt they could intervene. "There is something else," Quinn said carefully. "We found another email that was supposed to be deleted, but our system kept a backup copy. Show me." She pulled up a file on her tablet and handed it to me. This one was from Sophia to my mother, sent 2 weeks before the wedding. Marlene. I am worried about Lauren showing up. She has been talking about giving us a big gift, and honestly, it is making me uncomfortable. What if her gift is bigger than what your side of the family is contributing? It will make Brandon and I look bad. Can we find a way to minimize her presence at the reception? My mother's response was equally damning. I agree completely. Lauren has always had to make everything about herself. Let me handle it. By the time the wedding arrives, she will be lucky to get through the door. I set the tablet down carefully, afraid that if I held it any longer, I might throw it against the wall. They were afraid of me, not because I was difficult or caused tension, because I might outshine them, because my generosity might embarrass them, because the limited access guest they had dismissed as worthless might actually be more generous and successful than they wanted anyone to know. "Thank you for showing me this," I said to Quinn. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, flat and calm, when inside I was screaming. "Please make sure all of these records are preserved. I may need them later." "Of course." Quinn stood hesitating at the door. "For what it is worth, I am sorry." No one deserves to be treated that way by their own family. No, I agreed. They do not. After she left, I sat alone in the office for a long time. Outside the windows, the gardens of Cedarstone Manor spread out in careful patterns, beautiful and orderly, everything in its proper place. My family had tried to put me in my proper place too. Below them, behind them, out of sight and out of consideration. But they had made one critical error. They had done it all in writing. They had documented their cruelty, time-stamped their betrayal, created a paper trail of their malice that could never be denied or explained away. I printed out every email, every document, every piece of evidence of their systematic campaign to diminish me. I organized them into a folder and labeled it simply, Truth. Then I drove home, cooked myself dinner, and slept more peacefully than I had in years. The truth was on my side now, and the truth would set me free. The shift in my family's behavior started 3 days after my confrontation at their house. I noticed it first in the tone of the text messages, which transformed from demanding to plaintive almost overnight. Mom, Lauren, honey, I have been thinking about you. How are you doing, Dad? Your mother and I miss you. Let us have lunch sometime. Brandon. Hey, Em, I just wanted to check in. I hope everything is okay. The sudden sweetness was jarring and unnatural. These were not the same people who had commanded me to appear at a family meeting and demanded my apology. Something had changed. I knew what it was, of course. Rumors had started spreading through the extended family about my ownership of Cedarstone Manor. An aunt had called me to ask if it was true. A cousin had sent a congratulatory text. The information was leaking out drop by drop, and my immediate family was starting to feel the ripples. My mother left a voicemail that weekend, her voice pitched in a register I had never heard from her before, almost nervous. Sweetheart, I know things have been tense between us, but I hope you know how much your father and I love you. We should get together soon. Maybe I could cook your favorite dinner, that chicken dish you always liked as a kid. Call me back, okay? My favorite chicken dish. I could not remember my mother ever cooking anything specifically because I liked it. Brandon had favorite dishes. Brandon had foods that the whole family catered to. I had learned early to eat whatever was put in front of me and be grateful. But now suddenly I had favorites again. Now suddenly I was worth cooking for. The next message was from my father, and it contained information that surprised me. Lauren, I need to talk to you about something. We have been getting some notices from Cedarstone Manor about the wedding invoice. Apparently there were some charges that were not properly processed. Could you give me a call when you get a chance? I smiled when I heard that message. Quinn had told me she would be reviewing all the financial records from recent events, ensuring that proper protocols had been followed. The Hale Morgan wedding had received numerous special considerations that had never been properly documented or billed. Those oversights were being corrected now. Sophia's message came late that night, and it was the most transparent of all. Lauren, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I know you have been going through a lot, and I want you to know that I am here if you need to talk. Also, Brandon mentioned something about some confusion with the venue. If there is anything I can do to help sort that out, please let me know. We are family after all. Family. The word made me laugh out loud in my empty apartment. We are family now. We were not family when you asked my mother to minimize my presence at your wedding. We were not family when you worried that my gift might be bigger than what your side contributed. We were not family when you helped make sure I did not get a meal or a seat or a place in any of the photographs. But now that there was a financial issue, now that my name was connected to something valuable, now we were suddenly family again. I did not respond to any of the messages. Instead, I spent my days getting to know my new business meeting with Quinn and the rest of the staff at Cedarstone Manor, reviewing plans for upcoming events and learning the intricacies of running a historic venue. It was Quinn who alerted me to the next development. Your brother called the main office today, she said during one of our meetings. He was asking questions about the ownership structure. Who makes decisions? How to get in touch with the owner? What did you tell him? That all inquiries from the public should go through official channels? She smiled slightly. He did not seem to realize that you are the official channel. The calls from Brandon became more frequent after that. He left voicemails at odd hours, his voice increasingly strained. Lauren, I really need you to call me back. There is a problem with some invoices from the venue. Sophia is freaking out. We cannot afford any unexpected expenses right now." I saved that message, savoring the irony. Sophia was freaking out. About money. About unexpected expenses. The same Sophia who had wanted to minimize my presence at the wedding because she was afraid my gift might be too generous. Now she was worried about costs. The message from my mother that came next was more revealing than she probably intended. "Lauren, I do not know what is going on with you, but your silence is very hurtful. Your father and I have always done our best for you. If you are angry about something, you should tell us instead of just disappearing. Also, there seems to be some confusion about who owns Cedarstone Manor now. Your Aunt Hazel always made things so complicated. If you know anything about that, it would really help us out." So that was it. They had finally connected the dots. They knew or suspected that I was somehow involved with the manor. They just did not know how deep. They did not realize that I owned the majority stake, that every decision about the property flowed through me, that the venue they had used to humiliate me was now mine to control. I decided to let them wonder a little longer. Meanwhile, I was building a new life. I joined a yoga class that I met every morning at a studio near my apartment. I started a photography course, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I went to brunch with a group of women I met at a workshop for female entrepreneurs. For the first time in years, I had friendships that were not filtered through my family's expectations. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered it cautiously. "Is this Lauren Hale?" The voice was female professional, slightly nervous. "Yes, this is Lauren. My name is Marissa Chen. I am the new events coordinator at Cedarstone Manor. I have been reviewing the files from recent events, and I found something that I think you need to see. It is about your family and the wedding. I did not want to send it through email. I think you should come see it in person." My heart rate quickened. What kind of something an email? One that was supposed to be permanently deleted. I think it is something you would want to know about. "I will be there tomorrow morning," I said. I did not sleep much that night. My mind kept circling around what the email might contain. I had thought I knew the full extent of my family's betrayal. I had seen the messages about minimizing my presence, about keeping me away from photos, about not providing me with food. What else could there possibly be? I was about to find out that their cruelty had roots deeper than I had ever imagined. My family requested another meeting, this time at Cedarstone Manor itself. I agreed, but I chose the location within the manor. The formal conference room on the second floor with its long mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. The room where business decisions were made. The room where I now had authority. They arrived together, the four of them, presenting a unified front. My mother wore her best dress. My father had put on a jacket and tie. Brandon and Sophia clung to each other with the desperation of people who sensed that the ground beneath them was shifting. The venue manager showed them to the conference room, where I was already waiting, seated at the head of the table with documents spread before me. "Lauren," my mother's voice carried a false brightness. "What a beautiful room. I did not realize you could book spaces like this." "You cannot," I said pleasantly. "This room is not available to the public." Confusion flickered across her face, but she covered it quickly. "Well, it is lovely. Thank you for meeting with us." They took their seats, arranging themselves across from me like witnesses at a deposition. My father cleared his throat in that way that meant he was about to deliver a pronouncement. "Lauren, we have been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation, and we have realized that some things could have been handled better at the wedding." I waited. "Your mother and I may have made some choices that were not ideal," he continued. "We were trying to manage a complicated situation, and in the process, we might have hurt your feelings." Might have. I noted his word choice. So not a full admission, not an actual apology. Sophia leaned forward, her expression arranged into something approximating sympathy. "I know the seating situation was confusing. There were so many guests, and honestly, I was overwhelmed. If you felt left out, I am truly sorry. That was never our intention." "Never your intention," I repeated. I pulled the first document from my stack and slid it across the table. "Then perhaps you can explain this." The email landed in front of Sophia with a soft thud. Her face went white as she read the words she had written herself. Please remove Lauren Hale from the family section of the seating chart. She causes tension at family events. That is, Sophia's voice had gone thin and reedy. That was taken out of context. What context would make that acceptable, I asked. Brandon grabbed the paper, his eyes scanning the lines. His face cycled through several emotions: shock, recognition, and something that might have been shame. Look, Lauren, this was not. I slid the second document across the table. This one was from my mother. Please move Lauren Hale to the limited access guest category. She does not need a meal service. Keep her away from the photography areas. We want the wedding to look clean. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Tears began streaming down her face, but I recognized them for what they were. Not tears of remorse, tears of being caught. Megan, I was just trying to... She could not finish the sentence, trying to what I asked calmly. Make sure I did not contaminate your precious wedding with my presence. That is not fair, my father interjected. You are twisting everything. I pulled out the third document, the one that hurt the most. This is the email from you, Dad, sent to Sophia and the venue coordinator. Do whatever makes Sophia comfortable. Lauren will not make a scene. She never does. My father's face went from pale to deeply flushed in seconds. Where did you get these? This is private correspondence. You had no right. I own 51% of this venue, I said, and the words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Every email that passes through their servers is accessible to me. Every record, every request, every decision that was made to exclude me from my own brother's wedding. The stunned silence that followed was almost worth the years of pain they had caused me. You, my mother stammered, you own. The majority stake, I confirmed. Aunt Hazel left it to me, along with a substantial financial trust that ensures I will never need anything from any of you ever again. Brandon finally found his voice. But the wedding. We paid for the wedding here. You paid for the basic package. I let a small smile cross my face. I covered the rest. The upgraded catering, the extended venue hours, the premium photography package. I did it because I thought I was helping my brother celebrate the most important day of his life. Sophia looked like she might be sick. The invoice, the one we have been getting calls about, is accurate, I confirmed. All of the special considerations you requested, the ones that were never properly documented, have been reviewed and billed appropriately. You will find that your wedding actually cost significantly more than you budgeted for. The room erupted into chaos. My father is shouting about lawyers and fraud. My mother sobbing about how I had betrayed the family. Sophia screams at Brandon that this was all his fault. Brandon yelled back that she was the one who had wanted to minimize my presence in the first place. I sat quietly and watched them tear each other apart. All the carefully maintained facades, all the coordinated lies, all the years of presenting themselves as the perfect family while treating me like garbage. It was all crumbling before my eyes. When the shouting finally died down, I stood up and gathered my documents. I did not arrange this meeting to hurt you, I said, though a small part of me could not deny the satisfaction of seeing their masks finally slip. I arranged it because I needed you to understand something. My mother looked up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. What I am done, I said simply. Done trying to earn your approval. Done hoping that someday you will see me as worthy of your love. Done being the scapegoat for all of your disappointments and insecurities. Lauren, Brandon's voice cracked. I am your brother. You were my brother, I corrected him. Brothers do not sign off on orders to deny their sisters a meal at their wedding. Brothers do not approve requests to keep their sisters out of family photographs. Brothers do not marry women who refer to their sisters as something that needs to be minimized. I walked to the door and paused with my hand on the handle. Do not contact me again unless you are ready to have an honest conversation about what you did and why you did it. I will not hold my breath. I left them sitting in the ruins of their own making, 4 people who had spent years convincing themselves that their cruelty was justified, finally confronted with evidence they could not deny or explain away. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked out into the gardens that belonged to me now. For the first time in my life, I was not running away from my family. I was simply leaving. The days after the confrontation at Cedarstone Manor unfolded with a strange and beautiful quiet. For the first time in my memory, my calendar was completely free of family obligations. No dinners to attend where my presence would be merely tolerated, no holidays to navigate where I would be seated at the children's table, or assigned to bring napkins instead of a main dish. No phone calls to dread waiting to hear what I had done wrong this time. The freedom was disorienting at first. I had structured so much of my life around managing my family's expectations that I barely knew who I was without that constant pressure. But slowly, day by day, I began to discover her. I started waking up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The morning yoga classes I had joined became a daily ritual. I threw myself into the management of Cedarstone Manor with an energy that surprised even me. Quinn became not just a colleague, but a friend, someone who saw me clearly and appreciated what I brought to the table. Together, we developed a plan for expanding the venue's services, creating packages specifically designed for smaller, more intimate celebrations. Weddings for people who valued connection over spectacle. Anniversaries for couples who wanted meaningful memories rather than elaborate displays. "I am impressed," Quinn told me one afternoon as we reviewed the projections. "You have a real vision for this place." "I learned from the best," I said, thinking of Aunt Hazel. She always said that the most important thing about any celebration was making sure everyone felt welcome. Quinn smiled. "She would be proud of you." That evening, I sat in my apartment and allowed myself to feel the full weight of those words. Proud. Aunt Hazel would be proud. Not disappointed, not embarrassed, just proud. Of me. As I was. The calls from my family had not stopped entirely, but they had changed in character. The demanding tone was gone, replaced by something that might have been desperation. My mother left voicemails that grew increasingly frantic. "Lauren, this silence is killing your father and me. We are your parents. You cannot just cut us off like this. What will people think? What would people think?" Always, always it came back to appearances. Not whether they had hurt me, not whether their actions had been wrong, only whether other people might judge them for the consequences. Brandon's messages were more complex. Some of them were angry, accusing me of ruining his marriage by exposing the truth about the wedding costs. Others were pleading, asking me to remember how close we had been as children before everything had gone wrong. I remembered. I remembered building blanket forts in the living room, sharing secrets at bedtime. But I also remembered the man who had signed that email. Approved. Do not inform her. The man who had chosen his wife's comfort over his sister's dignity without a moment's hesitation. I did not respond to any of the messages. Instead, I invested in myself. I used some of the money from Aunt Hazel's trust to put a down payment on a new apartment, a beautiful space with a view of the river and enough room for a home office where I could work on my expanding freelance business. I reconnected with friends I had neglected and met new people who knew nothing about my history and saw me only as the person I was choosing to become. One afternoon, while volunteering at a local center, I met a woman named Ruth. She was in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines and eyes that had seen more hardship than anyone should have to endure. But she smiled constantly, and she radiated a peace that I found myself drawn to. "You have been hurt by people who should have loved you. I can see that too," she told me. "I try," I said. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way," Ruth said. "The people who hurt us, they do not define us. What defines us is what we do with the pain. Whether we let it make us smaller, or whether we use it to become something bigger than we ever imagined." I thought about her words for days afterward. What was I doing with my pain? Was I using it to grow, or was I still letting it shrink me? The answer came when my phone rang late one night. The caller ID showed Cedarstone Manor. "Lauren." It was Marissa, the events coordinator, who had promised to show me the deleted email. "I found something else, something I think you need to see right away." "What is it?" "I cannot explain over the phone. Can you come in tomorrow morning? I will be there at 9. Sleep did not come easily that night. My mind kept circling around what Marissa might have discovered. I had thought I knew everything now. What more could there possibly be? The next morning, as I drove toward the manor with the sun rising over the mountains, I reminded myself of Ruth's words. Whatever I was about to learn, I would not let it make me smaller. I would use it to become something bigger. I had come too far to turn back now. Marissa was waiting for me in the small office adjacent to the main administrative suite. Her face was pale, and she kept clasping and unclasping her hands as I walked in. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I did not want to put this in writing. I thought you should see it in person." She led me to her computer, where an email chain was displayed on the screen. The timestamps showed messages from 2 weeks before the wedding. "We do a regular backup of all correspondence," Marissa explained. "Most of the time it is just routine stuff. But I was doing some housekeeping in the archives, and I found a folder that had been flagged for deletion. Someone had tried to permanently erase these messages. Who? That is what is interesting." Marissa pointed to the screen. "The deletion request came from your mother's email address, but the original messages were sent by multiple people in your family." I leaned closer to the screen and began to read. The first email was from Sophia, sent to my mother and brother. "We need to talk about Lauren. I have been thinking about her constant need for attention and how it might affect the wedding. Honestly, I do not want her in any of the important photos. Can we figure out a way to keep her in the background?" My mother's response was equally damning. "I agree. She has always been difficult. Remember how she made everything about herself at Christmas 2 years ago? I think if we position her carefully, maybe at one of the back tables, we can minimize the impact." Brandon's contribution was shorter, but no less painful. "Whatever you think is best. I do not want her ruining Sophia's day. Ruining Sophia's day. By existing. By being present at my own brother's wedding." But there was more. Another chain of emails that filled me with a chilling clarity. This one was from my father, sent to the venue coordinator directly. "I wanted to follow up on my wife's request about guest classification. My daughter Lauren is complicated. She has mental health issues that make her unpredictable. We think it is best for everyone if she is kept at a distance from the main celebration. For her own good, of course. Mental health issues. Unpredictable. For her own good." They had not just excluded me. They had created a false narrative about my mental stability to justify their cruelty. They had told strangers that I was unhinged, that I needed to be managed, that keeping me away from the celebration was actually an act of kindness. "There is one more," Marissa said quietly. She scrolled down to a final email, and my breath caught in my throat. It was from my mother to Sophia, sent the night before the wedding. "Everything is arranged. The venue staff think Lauren has psychological problems, so they will not question anything we do. She will show up, see her situation, and probably leave early. Problem solved. We can finally have a family event without her dragging down the mood." Problem solved. Those 2 words contained everything I needed to know about my place in their family. I was not a sister or a daughter. It was a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed, a stain to be minimized so that they could present their perfect family image to the world. They had not just hurt me, they had systematically destroyed my reputation with people I had never met, painted me as mentally unstable, so that any reaction I had to their cruelty would be dismissed as confirmation of the lies they had already told. It was brilliant in a twisted way. If I had complained about my treatment at the wedding, the staff would have simply nodded knowingly. Poor Lauren. Her family warned us she was difficult. Her family told us she had issues. Whatever she says, she is probably just having an episode. They had trapped me in a narrative where my own pain was evidence of the very instability they had invented. I sat back in my chair, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. For years I had wondered if maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I did make everything about myself. Maybe I was the problem and everyone else could see it clearly except me. Now I know the truth. I was not the problem. I had never been the problem. The problem was a family so committed to their own comfort that they were willing to lie about their daughter's mental health to justify excluding her from a celebration. "Print all of this," I said to Marissa. "Every email, every timestamp, every piece of evidence." She nodded and began clicking through the documents. While I waited, I thought about what came next. I had options now. I could expose them publicly, send copies of the emails to the extended family members who had heard rumors about my instability for years. I could confront them again armed with this new evidence and watch them try to explain away their lies. Or I could simply walk away, take my manor and my inheritance and my freedom and build a life that had nothing to do with them. Let them spin whatever stories they wanted to spin. Let them believe whatever lies they need to believe. Because the truth was, they had already lost. They had lost me completely and permanently. They had spent years undermining my confidence, destroying my sense of worth, convincing me that I was less than they were. And all that effort, all that cruelty, had accomplished nothing. Here I was, successful, strong, free. They had wanted to minimize me. Instead, they had set me free. I took the printed documents from Marissa and tucked them into my bag. Whatever I decided to do with this information, I had time to figure it out. For now, it was enough to know the truth. "Thank you for finding this," I said to Marissa, "and for telling me." She nodded, her eyes bright with something that might have been admiration. "For what it is worth, I think your aunt would be proud of how you're handling all of this." I walked out of Cedarstone Manor into the morning sunlight. The gardens stretched before me, beautiful and serene, untouched by the ugliness that humans inflicted on each other. Birds sang in the trees. Flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. The world continued on, indifferent to the drama of one family and one woman's journey toward freedom. I thought about the paper badge I still kept in a drawer at home. Limited access guest. Those 3 words that had changed everything. They had meant them as an insult, a reminder of my place, a way to keep me small and scared and desperate for their approval. But they had miscalculated badly, because being denied access to their world had finally shown me how toxic that world was. Being excluded from their celebration had freed me to create celebrations of my own. Being told I did not deserve a seat at their table had given me permission to build my own table, one where everyone was welcome and no one was ever made to feel like less than. They thought they were punishing me. Instead, they had given me the greatest gift of my life. They had given me back. The final confrontation came on my terms. I chose the location, the timing, and the narrative. I invited them to Cedarstone Manor, to the same conference room where I had first shown them the emails about my exclusion. This time, there would be no ambiguity, no room for them to spin their version of events, only truth laid bare for everyone to see. They arrived looking smaller than I remembered them. My father's shoulders seemed to sag a weariness I had never noticed before. My mother's makeup could not quite conceal the dark circles under her eyes. Brandon and Sophia stood close together, but no longer looked like a united front. They looked like survivors of a disaster, shell-shocked and uncertain. "Thank you for coming," I said as they took their seats. "I wanted to give you one more chance for what." My father's voice carried none of his usual authority. He sounded tired, defeated. "To tell me the truth." The silence stretched between us. I let it expand, let the discomfort fill the room, let them feel the weight of everything they had done. Finally, my mother spoke. "Lauren, whatever you think happened." "I know exactly what happened," I interrupted. "I have the emails. All of them, including the ones where you told the venue staff that I have mental health issues, that I am unpredictable. That keeps me away from the celebration for my own good." My mother's face crumpled. I was just trying to explain." "Explain what?" "That you needed an excuse to exclude me. That you were so afraid I might embarrass you that you invented a story about my mental instability. It was not like that." Sophia's voice had gone high and thin. The wedding was so stressful. So you lied about your future sister-in-law's mental health to justify treating her like a pariah at her own brother's wedding." I let the words hang in the air, because of stress. Sophia burst into tears, and for once I felt no compulsion to comfort her. Her tears were not about me. They were about herself, about being caught, about the consequences she was finally facing for her actions. "Brandon," I said, turning to my brother, "do you have anything to say?" He would not meet my eyes. His hands twisted together in his lap, and I saw something I had never seen in him before. Shame, Real shame, not the performance of it. I did not know it was that bad, he said finally. Sophia was stressed, and Mom said it would be easier if you were not so visible, and I thought... He trailed off. You thought what I thought you would understand. You always understand. There it was, the heart of everything. I always understood. I always forgave. I always made myself smaller so that they could feel bigger. They had counted on that pattern continuing forever. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens that Aunt Hazel had loved so much, the gardens that belonged to me now. I spent 32 years understanding, I said quietly. I understood when you forgot my birthdays. I understood when my achievements were never celebrated. I understood when Sophia decided I was competition and started a campaign to push me out of the family. I understood when you excluded me from my own brother's wedding. I turned to face them. But here is what I have finally understood about understanding. It does not change anything. It does not make you treat me better. It does not earn me a place at your table. All it does is give you permission to keep hurting me. My mother reached out toward me. Lauren, please. We can fix this. Can you? I asked. Can you undo years of making me feel worthless? Can you take back the lies you told about my mental health? Can you give me back all the family moments I missed because you decided I was not important enough to include? She had no answer. None of them did. I picked up my bag and removed the final piece of documentation I had saved for this moment. A letter written on legal letterhead. This is a formal notice, I said, placing it on the table. As the majority owner of Cedarstone Manor, I am implementing new policies regarding family reservations. Specifically, any future events involving members of the Hale family will require my personal approval, and I am choosing not to approve any such events for the foreseeable future. My father finally found his voice. You cannot do that. I can, I said. And I am. You used this venue to humiliate me. You will not have the opportunity to do so again. This is vindictive. Sophia had stopped crying and was now glaring at me with undisguised hostility. You are just trying to punish us. No, I said calmly. Punishment would be exposing those emails to the entire extended family. Punishment would be telling everyone exactly what you said about my mental health. Punishment would be destroying your reputation the way you tried to destroy mine. I walked toward the door. This is not punishment. This is simply the consequences of your choices. You decided that I was not worth treating with basic dignity. Fine. But that decision means you have lost access to me and to anything that belongs to me, including this venue. Lauren. Brandon's voice cracked. Please, we are family. I paused at the door and looked back at him. At all of them. My mother sobs. My father was rigid with suppressed fury, Sophia trembling with rage. Brandon looked like the world had shifted beneath his feet. The family treats each other with love, I said. Family makes space for each other. The family does not write emails describing how to minimize someone's presence at a celebration. The family does not lie about mental illness to justify cruelty. I opened the door. When you understand what family actually means, let me know. Until then, there is nothing more to say. I walked out of the conference room and down the grand staircase of Cedarstone Manor. Behind me, I could hear voices rising in argument, the sound of a family finally confronting the ugliness they had created together. I did not look back. The gardens were beautiful in the afternoon light, and I walked through them slowly, letting the peace of the place wash over me. Aunt Hazel had walked these same paths. She had planned and planted and nurtured, creating something beautiful that would outlast her, and she had left it to me. Not because I was perfect, not because I had earned it, but because she had seen me clearly, had loved me completely, and had wanted me to have a place where I would always belong. I found a bench near the rose garden and sat down, letting the emotions finally flow. Not anger, not bitterness, just a profound sadness for what might have been mixed with an equally profound relief at what I had finally escaped. I had done it. I had stood up to them, confronted them with the truth, and reclaimed my own narrative. Whatever happened next, they could no longer define me. They could no longer convince me that I was less than. They could no longer use my desire for family against me. I was free. and freedom I was discovering felt exactly like coming home. 6 months after the confrontation at Cedarstone Manor, I drove to Cannon Beach on a morning so clear that I could see for miles in every direction. The Pacific Ocean stretched before me, vast and ancient, and utterly unconcerned with human drama. I had come here to mark an anniversary of sorts, not of the wedding that had changed everything, but of the day I had walked away from the family that had never really wanted me. The day I had chosen myself. The beach was nearly empty at this hour, just a few early morning walkers and some seabirds patrolling the shoreline. I took off my shoes and let my feet sink into the cold sand, feeling the familiar shock of the water when the waves rolled in. In my pocket was the paper badge from Brandon's wedding. Limited access guest. I had kept it all these months, not as a wound to pick at, but as a reminder of what I had survived. I pulled it out now and looked at it one last time. The paper had softened with handling the edges, worn the words slightly faded, but they were still legible, still a record of the day my family had made their priorities perfectly clear. I thought about everything that had happened since then. The inheritance from Aunt Hazel that had given me financial security, the ownership of Cedarstone Manor that had given me power, the confrontations that had finally exposed the truth about my family's treatment of me. My family had continued to reach out, of course. My mother left voicemails that alternated between guilt trips and desperate pleas. My father sent formal letters through his attorney, trying to establish visitation rights to a daughter he had never bothered to truly know. Brandon texted occasionally, usually late-at-night messages that never quite managed to be the apology I needed to hear. Sophia had surprised me most of all. 3 months after the confrontation, she had sent a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual letter, handwritten on nice stationery. "Lauren," it began. "I know you have no reason to read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I was wrong. Not just wrong about the wedding, but wrong about you from the very beginning. I saw you as competition when you were just trying to be part of the family. I convinced myself that your achievements threatened my place, when really you were just living your life." The letter went on for 2 pages, detailing the insecurities that had driven Sophia's behavior, the fears that had made her see enemies where there were none. It ended with something unexpected. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not even expect you to respond, but I needed you to know that I see what I did now, and I am sorry, truly sorry. Not for getting caught, but for being the kind of person who needed to hurt you to feel safe." I had read that letter many times since receiving it. I had not responded, and I did not know if I ever would. Forgiveness was a complicated thing, and I was still learning how to navigate it. What I did know was that Sophia's apology did not change what she had done, but it did suggest that change was possible, that people could look honestly at their worst actions and feel genuine remorse. I held the paper badge up to the morning light, letting the sun illuminate those 3 words one final time. Then I walked into the water until it swirled around my ankles, and I let the badge go. The waves took it immediately, spinning it away from me, pulling it out into the vastness of the ocean. Within seconds it was gone, dissolved into foam and memory. I stood there for a long time, watching the horizon, feeling the cold water numb my feet and the warm sun heat my face. The contradiction felt appropriate somehow. Pain and comfort, ending and beginning. Everything is true at once. When I finally walked back up the beach to where I had left my shoes, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had finally stopped carrying it for other people. The weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their need for me to be smaller so they could feel bigger. All of it had been washed away with that paper badge claimed by the ocean, no longer mine to hold. I drove back to Portland that afternoon, stopping at my favorite bakery for a pastry and coffee, then continuing on to Cedarstone Manor. Quinn had called to tell me about some exciting developments. The new packages we had designed for intimate celebrations were booking faster than we had anticipated, and there was talk of expanding to a second location. "This is all because of you," Quinn said as we walked through the gardens together. "Your vision for what this place could be." "Our vision. You have been just as essential." She shook her head. "I know how to manage an event venue. You know how to create something meaningful. There is a difference. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my apartment and watched the sun set over the city I now called home. My phone buzzed with a text from one of my new friends inviting me to dinner later in the week. My laptop showed emails from clients who valued my work. This was the life I had built. Not the limited existence they had imagined I deserved, but a real life rich with meaning and connection and purpose. I was not a limited access guest anymore. I was the owner of my own story. If you are listening to this story, I want you to know this. You deserve to be seen and valued. If the people around you cannot see that if they hand you paper badges and exclude you, it's not your job to convince them. It's your job to build tables of your own and create spaces where everyone is welcome. That is what Aunt Hazel did for me with Cedarstone Manor. Tell me about the moments when you chose yourself, when you stopped accepting crumbs and started demanding a place at the feast. Because the truth is, we are all just walking each other home, and it is a lot easier when we walk together. The story was just beginning.